Especially now that Pete Buttigieg is out of office, one of the best elected messengers in the Democratic Party is Congressman Jake Auchincloss of Massachusetts, who's repeatedly gone on Fox News and sparred with MAGA Fox News hosts. And he did so recently with MAGA Fox News host Will Cain, in which Auchincloss defended the notion of due process against a person and a movement that seems to have no regard for it. And it's really, really good. But before we unpack all that, if you end up liking this video and you want to support the channel, please be sure to hit the like, subscribe, and alert bells before you go. All right, friends, we're going to play this. It's about 6 minutes long. We're going to go through the whole thing. I will note that Will Cain, MAGA Fox News host, is he's rising in profile, and he has been humiliated back and back by Congressman Ivey and others. I think other Jim Himes recently as well. It's just been one after another, like 3 or 4 Democratic Congresspeople, and now you add Auchincloss to it, and he just does a really good job. So we're going to play this and unpack it together.
It all totals $79 billion in foreign assistance a year. It begs the question, who is this American government for, if not American citizens? Let's bring in Massachusetts Democrat Congressman Jake Auchincloss. Congressman Auchincloss, thank you for being with us. I know we tried to make this happen the other day. I'm glad we were able to revisit and get together here on this Friday. I didn't even bring up the amount of money that we're spending on war across this world that does not seem to, on its surface, serve the American citizen. And on that front, it's not exclusively a Democrat issue. There are many Republicans as well, I would argue, that aren't serving the American interest. But why is it on so many of these issues we just highlighted, that of illegal immigrants, the Democrats seem to be serving the interests of people who are not citizens of America?
Will, thanks for having me on. It's about freedom. Freedom means freedom from fear. Fear of criminals, freedom from fear of terrorists, and also freedom from the fear that the government is going to harass you. And that means that everybody whose feet is on American soil gets to stand in front of a judge and have equal justice under law. We protect that for everybody.
Well, Congressman, I appreciate that. And I appreciate you saying you also have a right to be free from criminals and free from terrorism. That, of course, would be rights of the American citizen, some of which is being infringed upon by these illegal immigrants. I think on that we can agree. We've seen the crime, both you and I. We've seen the crime by some of these illegal immigrants. I know that's not something, I would hope that's not something that you would tolerate. But on the right to be free from the government and stand on this soil, equal rights before the law, that's just simply not the way it works. If you're an illegal immigrant in this country, you don't have the exact same rights as an American citizen. You don't have the same exact due process rights as a citizen of America.
Well, here's the challenge. So first of all, let me say, agreed. You commit a crime and you are convicted of that crime, you're out of this country. Totally agree with you. But here's the challenge. Let's imagine it's 3 years from now and instead of a Republican president, it's a Democrat president. And this Democratic president says, you know, this journalist, Will Cain, man, he's really irritating me. And so I am going to lock him up and I'm going to accuse him of sedition and libel. And you call your lawyer and you say, whoa, I want to get a hearing in front of a judge. And the Democratic president says, nope, Will Cain is not legally a citizen because he committed crimes in the past that deprive him of due process. And you don't get a hearing. What I am telling you is that unless we ensure that everybody in this country gets to stand in front of a judge, everybody in this country cannot be confident that they will be able to stand in front of a judge when their political opponents get power.
So we'll come back to this, but this is a huge point to me that I wish Democrats would bring up more often. Again, it's the shoe on the other foot mentality. And quite frankly, even though we all understand what the shoe on the other foot means, very few of us actually seem to factor that into our analysis. But we should. Okay, is what you're doing so important that it justifies setting a precedent which could be potentially abused? Again, that doesn't mean that you stop doing what you're doing necessarily, but it means you actually consider what it might portend for the future. The problem is Republicans are used to acting unilaterally in bad faith. Not that Democrats are perfect, but they are more likely to support rules, norms, institutions, and decorum than their Republican counterparts. They are less likely to abuse, bend, twist, violate norms, institutions, rules, and decorum for short-term political advantage. Will Cain is used to fighting from a position of privilege in this respect because his party is much more inclined to do that. But Auchincloss is right. And again, I will refer you to what a conservative President Reagan appointee judge in the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals said when he issued a ruling against the Trump administration, because this was his exact logic, that even though We'll get to Will Cain's response, even though so many in MAGA are like, listen, I don't believe that's not, we don't have to worry about that. This is only for undocumented migrants. The very premise works against citizens as well. Because if you have an undocumented migrant who is, yes, afforded due process in this country, this is a matter of Supreme Court precedent. We have recognized that residents of this country, be they citizens, be they, legal residents, be they undocumented immigrants, there is a form of due process that must exist. Now, is Will Cain right that it's not totally the same in all instances? Yes, but there is due process, which is constitutionally required even for undocumented migrants. Anyone who tells you otherwise is a liar or an idiot. So the point is, if you have, say, in the case of Kilmar Abrego Garcia, somebody who, yes, is an undocumented immigrant, but the court has said you can't deport him to El Salvador, and you deport him to El Salvador anyway, violating due process, what's to stop an administration from doing that to a U.S. citizen? Nothing. And again, when people say, well, you can't do that because you can't deport citizens, you couldn't deport this guy either. The same law which says you can't deport U.S. citizens also said that you can't deport this specific undocumented migrant. And if you violated that law, if you broke the law to do X, why can't you break the law to do Y? Especially if you then get to say, well, this person's already out of the country, so I don't have to worry about getting them back. There's no obligation for me to get them back. This is a perfectly valid objection to make, even according to a conservative Reagan-appointed judge. And he said not only could this apply to U.S. citizens, but political opponents. So getting all the way back to Representative Auchincloss, this would absolutely apply or could potentially apply to Will Cain if a Democratic president were sufficiently ruthless and wanted to teach Will Cain a lesson. And they just don't seem to care. But we'll see what happens. Let's continue.
Confident that they will be able to stand in front of a judge when their political opponents get power.
Congressman, I'm confident that your hypothetical wouldn't even play out under a Democratic president. And I'm confident that you don't believe that either. I'm confident that you don't believe
this
that.
This president just said he wants to apply his extradition of immigrants to El Salvador next to American citizens. Do you understand where this leads? The slippery slope that it takes us to? Until somebody gets to stand in front of a judge, we don't know whether they're illegal. We don't know what crimes they have been convicted of. The point is that politicians don't get to be judge, jury, and executioner. They have to go through the courts of law.
Congressman, I'm well aware now of what you're referencing. I'm not always well aware of every single thing uttered from the President of the United States' mouth. But I am well aware of the statement he issued from the Oval Office about possibly expanding the El Salvadorian deportations to homegrown criminals. He did say very clearly in that clip, we'd have to obey the law. Not once, but twice. Homegrown criminals, but we'd have to obey the law. The reason I stick on that detail, Congressman, is that I feel like your party, even in your hypothetical that you just...
Let me just stop right there. The problem is Trump violated the law by deporting Kilmar Abrego Garcia. So this idea that I will only do things if the law permits it, but you're doing things that the law doesn't permit, that's the problem. That's why 9-0, the Supreme Court of the United States said that you had to facilitate the return of Kilmar Abrego Garcia because you unlawfully deported him. So this whole bullshit disclaimer caveat, oh, Trump will only do this horrific thing if the law permits it. You might have a point if Trump were fastidiously obeisant towards the law, but he's not. He's never been. So it's not much by way of comfort. There's no comfort in that statement. And by the way, it is apparent. It is obvious. It's one of the most fundamental aspects of American law that you can't unilaterally deport an American citizen to a foreign country. The government doesn't have the right to deport American citizens to other countries. So Trump saying, oh, I'd only do it if the law permits. It's like saying that it would be like Trump saying, I will only commit murder if the law permits me to commit murder. Well, no, by definition, it's illegal. So it's really weird and creepy and nefarious that you would even suggest that that's a possibility. Right? That's the point. So again, just a total bullshit argument from Cain. I also point out, you notice how Cain's like, I don't have to worry about a Democrat deporting me. Do you see how he actually gives away the game? Because MAGA Republicans, they talk about us fear-mongering. They talk, oh, you're so worried. You're fear-mongering about Donald Trump and abuse of power. Well, MAGA Republicans have long said similar things about the Democratic Party, that they're so worried that the Democrats, they're the real authoritarians and fascists and communists and Marxists. They want to take away all our guns and, force us to worship Cthulhu instead of Jesus. They do all these things, but they so often betray how they know we're not like that, how they know that we actually, as a movement, liberals, progressives, the Democratic Party overall, are not an authoritarian movement, because they actually claim to trust us with that sort of power. By saying what he said, Will Cain tacitly concedes that the Democratic Party is better than his party, that he could trust the Democratic Party with the sort of power that he wants Democrats to trust Republicans with. I'm not worried that you guys would ever abuse your power. Oh, wait a minute. I thought your entire movement was based on that. They also did the same thing, if you remember, during presidential immunity. Remember that? When Trump v. United States came down from the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court granted Trump sweeping presidential immunity, Joe Biden was president. President Biden was the most powerful man on earth. President Biden could wield the powers of the presidency and then reap the rewards of presidential immunity. And MAGA Republicans didn't give a damn. They weren't worried at all. Those same MAGA Republicans are like, Joe Biden's trying to cancel student loan debt. He's a fascist. He's going to take away all our guns again, make us worship Cthulhu, and trans all our kids. He's a real authoritarian. And they didn't freak out at all about presidential immunity. It's how you know they're not principled. It's how you know they're not serious, because just some people who genuinely believe that Joe Biden is some sort of, remember the Independence Hall speech where President Biden spoke in front of a red, white, and blue background in Philadelphia, right? That iconic speech. Joe Biden's giving a speech in front of a red background. It's one of the scariest things I've ever seen. Well, then why wouldn't you be worried about presidential immunity when he's president, when he has the power, when SEAL Team 6 answers to him? The fact that they weren't worried betrayed everything, totally undermined their position. And Will Cain just did it here too. He says he's not worried. But actually, the truth is, I think Will Cain would be worried. I think Will Cain would be a little bit concerned if a Democratic president could claim these powers, because any sane person should be worried about any president to one degree or another, claiming the right to unlawfully exile people that they don't like, even if the law forbids it. Just pointing that out. We'll conclude.
Gave to me is playing into fear-mongering. You're trying to convince the American citizen that they are going to be in the same situation as an illegal immigrant who's accused of being a member of MS-13, domestic violence, and human smuggling. And it's simply not realistic. In fact, it's fear-mongering to suggest to the American people that somehow deporting Kilmar Brego Garcia means next they're going to deport Will Cain.
Yeah, I think fear-mongering is when the president tries to blame Canada for our problems, right? I'm not fear-mongering. I am defending the core principle of freedom. Freedom from fear. And again, that means that individuals should be able to walk to a CVS and buy some shaving cream without having to ask the clerk to unlock it for them. We absolutely need to address public safety and open-air drug use and homelessness in our downtowns, because people should be able to go around their daily life and have that freedom. But it also means that they are free from government intruding upon their personal liberty. That is a 1,000-year-old tradition of the Anglo-Saxon legal code.
Yeah, Auchincloss is so good. I definitely recommend that you follow his work because, again, he's one of the finest elected communicators in the Democratic Party. There are others as well. It's not like we actually have a shortage of this. We need more. But I love the fact that he's willing to go on Fox News and in a Buttigieg, Socratic, sort of calm style, spar with people. I love the firebrands. I love the people who will still, give it back. But I also like people who will very professorially debunk these notions. And so, yes, he's right. And there's a reason, by the way, I will remind you that the polling indicates that Will Cain is dead wrong and Jake Auchincloss is right. Not only is Auchincloss right on the law, he's right as a matter of public polling, because the Kilmar Brego Garcia case is one of the worst polling issues for Trump, and there are many, even according to the most recent New York Times Siena College poll, perhaps the most individually reputable poll in the country. So, yeah, great stuff from Auchincloss. Definitely hope he shows up more on Fox News to spar with MAGA. And in the meantime, let me know what you think in the comments.